And we're really grateful to that group of sponsors. Our first sponsor, BGE, is a longtime MCEC supporter and partner. We're also welcoming Schneider Electric to the panel and as our sponsor for the series. Siemens will be highlighting e-mobility in a future seminar. And we want to give special thanks to our returning power sponsor, Kohn Resnick, an award-winning advisory assurance and tax firm with offices in Bethesda, Maryland. And to get going, I'd like to now introduce today's program moderator. We are pleased to have Jeff Oxnam, the founder and CEO of American Microgrid Solutions, LLC. He is also the chairman of the board for the Maryland Clean Energy Center. Jeff is a veteran utility executive who was appointed by Governor Larry Hogan to the chairmanship of our board. He is also a member of Leadership Maryland Class 2010 and was awarded the William Donald Schaefer People Helping People Award in 2016 for his work to improve financial literacy through junior achievement. On a personal note, Jeff is into watches and he is also learning to grow orchids. I'm really pleased to welcome our chairman this morning to moderate our panel, Jeff Oxnam.
Hey, thanks, Kathy. And wow, be careful of what you talk to Kathy about in conversations during social networking. But yeah, it's both are. I'm a novice in both and enjoy both. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. It is really exciting to kick off this new speaker series this year. It has been widely attended in the past, and we're off to a great start this year. And there really isn't a better time to be talking about today's topic than there is today. Obviously, what we have seen coming out from policy in DC, but taking a look down at the wide variety of initiatives being taken at the state level. On the flip side of it, to enhance and of course promote a stronger, healthier, more powerful power system throughout the United States. On the flip side, the really frightening aspects are that we are seeing the costs of aging infrastructure and declining infrastructure, costs that'll have to be borne by everyone in this country. We are seeing great innovation, and we'll hear about a lot of that today, to improve that infrastructure, both from the transmission side and then from the other side at the end user. We are also sadly seeing energy being used as a weapon in parts of this country, various parts of this world. Thank God not in this country. Today is about, however, connections and interconnections. Today is about macro meeting micro in the US power grid and the great work that is going on to create innovation. Maryland Clean Energy Center is here to encourage that innovation in Maryland. We're here to promote knowledge like we're doing today, to bring people together, industry, government, and all the people of Maryland over issues of energy and energy use. We're here very importantly to leverage public funding with private investment to expand the use and deployment of innovative technology. We're really excited not only about what we've done in the past, but in the upcoming future with a new climate catalytic fund that we are going to be managing and building out efforts to improve that infrastructure here in Maryland. More on that will come in the future. Today, I'm excited to introduce a truly exceptional panel. We're going to learn about the challenges facing the transmission grid and what's being done by Barbara Tiran and from ACOR. And then we're going to learn about the other end that is interconnecting from Janet Gerber, Michael Yombrock, Nicole Jeannot, and Jake Friedman on a variety of projects, excitingly here in Maryland, but that are part of a more dynamic, not only technical, but financial program put together by EcoStructure, Schneider. The projects in Montgomery County have been very impactful and have been demonstrating leadership around the country. Had the great fortune to be at the Urban Winery the other night when the Montgomery County Green Bank announced the expansion of its funding efforts and more programs happening in Montgomery County. Here at MCEC, we're going to be bringing that kind of growth to the rest of the state. So with that, I'm very excited that everybody's here today for this first presentation, Macro Meets Micro in the Grid of the Future. Think about connections and interconnections today. And I'd like to start by introducing Barbara Turin, Director of the Microgrid Initiative at ACOR. She's at the American Council, so ACOR stands for the American Council on Renewable Energy. Barbara also serves as past president of the board of the director of Women's Council on Energy and the Environment, and was general director of the IEEE Power and Energy Society General Meeting and Organizing Committee, hosting almost 2,000 delegates from around the world. She brings an outstanding background in federal and state government relations and has been an advocate on all levels for bringing together the technology necessary for us to have the infrastructure as a country we need to continue to grow. Barbara holds a BA with honors from Stanford University and an MBA from Yale. So with that, I want to thank you, all of our speakers, for attending here today. I want to thank you all for attending, and I'll hand it over to Barbara.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's a real pleasure to be with all of you, and I'm excited to be launching the speaker series this year with the Maryland Clean Energy Center. I am Barbara Turin, Director of the Microgrid Initiative at ACOR, and again, it's a real pleasure and honor to be here. So first, let me talk a little bit about what the Microgrid Initiative is. The Microgrid Initiative actually operates as a partnership between ACOR, the American Council on Renewable Energy, and ASIG, which is the Americans for a Clean Energy Grid. So essentially the Microgrid Initiative, or as we like to call it, MGI, resides with both those organizations. Next slide, please. And there's a very simple vision statement which guides the work in which we're engaged. The Microgrid Initiative is an educational campaign that supports the vision statement you see on the screen. Very simply, it's talking about jobs and economic development, a cleaner environment, and lower costs for consumers. And I'm delighted to say that 33 highly diverse organizations, some big, some small, have signed on to this vision statement. And if you go to the Microgrid Initiative website, you can see their company logos and organizational affiliations. And we're delighted to have that support and welcome all others who are interested in achieving this vision statement. So what does that exactly mean? Next slide, please. So the vision focuses on the fact that we have abundant domestic energy resources in this country. And interestingly, in the 15 states between the Rockies and Mississippi, it accounts for 88% of the nation's wind technical potential and 56% of the solar technical potential. That's a lot of energy. However, interestingly also, this region of the country is only expected to need 30% of that energy supply between now and the middle of the century, between now and 2050. So you can see there is excess energy available in that region that could be utilized if we could somehow transport it to where the load is higher, where the electricity load needs additional supply. And that would be specifically on the East and West coasts. So that's part of the vision, is how to tap into those resources so they're not wasted, use them, and help achieve that vision statement, which again is about economic development, a cleaner environment, and more affordable electricity for customers. Next slide, please. And when we're looking at the macrogrid, is enabling interregional transfer so that the wind and solar resources and the other energy resources can be transferred back and forth between the Western and the Eastern interconnection so that they are more robust. And as you can see on the slide, it will improve not only the system's flexibility and resilience, but once again, it will lower costs for customers. So there's a huge system performance benefit that comes from having more interregional capabilities. And the resilience, of course, is increased because in today's world with extreme weather events, we need to be able to tap into resources that are outside of the impacted area so that we can help alleviate some of the financial and human suffering that has occurred in extreme weather events in the past. Next slide, please. So as we look to expand and upgrade the interregional transmission lines, we know that, as I've said, there's a vision statement that helps to guide the principles here, but the reality of all of this means that there's enormous benefits. And if we could invest $1, we would be able to then produce $2.50 for every dollar of that investment. And so that would enable the ability for the resources to go back and forth across the seam, which you see running down the middle of the country there between the Eastern and Western interconnections. It would save consumers, it's estimated, $47 billion annually. So this is a very important project for our future, both in economic terms as well as in energy terms. Next slide, please. So how do we go about advancing the macrogrid initiative? As I mentioned, it's an educational campaign. And that's why I'm very grateful to Kathy and the MCEC team for allowing me to talk a little bit here about what it is we do. We're trying to reach stakeholders and talk about the benefits of transmission. We're trying to build support around decision makers for the new policy and regulatory developments that are occurring. I'm very pleased that there's a lot of attention at the federal and state and local level these days around transmission as we engage in a clean energy transformation across this country. So specifically, it means that I'm reaching out to congressional leadership who are involved in the energy arena, talking about what this means to have an increased and enhanced transmission. Again, reaching out just like we are today with local and state and regional stakeholders who may have an interest in this. And then the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission launched a transmission planning and generation cost allocation rulemaking recently. And so we have been involved in helping to encourage that going forward, commending FERC for its leadership, and also for the establishment of a joint task force, a FERC-NARUC joint task force on transmission to try and collaborate up front around some of the more controversial issues that are associated in this arena so that hopefully like minds can be achieved as FERC proceeds with its rulemaking. And note is that that joint task force is co-chaired by Maryland Public Service Commissioner and Chairman Jason Stanek. So we're very much tied into what's happening in the state of Maryland as well. Next slide, please. So I've made a lot of claims already today about the benefits of transmission, and I've cited some statistics and data and numbers associated with that, but those are only as credible as the substantiated analysis that backs that up. And that's a big part of what we do at the Macrogrid Initiative is we engage in research to help identify what those transmission benefits are and articulate them and then validate them through a rigorous analytical process. And so a number of reports have been issued. The first report that we saw there on the screen was Just and Reasonable, which is looking at essentially an ICF study that helps support ACOR in this effort. And it looked at 12 different transmission upgrades in the Midwest and southeastern part of the country. In other words, in MISO and SPP. And in that analysis, it was revealed that 9 of the 12 system upgrades delivered system-wide benefits across. So again, when I say that there are widespread transmission benefits, this report is what substantiated that claim. Next slide, please. And when we talk about helping to alleviate extreme weather events, again, a study was done to help understand what that might mean and to make sure that that was well documented with rigorous analysis. And the cover sheet that you see there, it reflects a study on transmission making the power system resilient to extreme weather. This particular report quantified the value of interregional transmission in 5 extreme weather events in Texas, New England, and the Midwest. And using just one of those examples, it was found that Winter Storm Uri, which occurred in ERCOT, or the state of Texas, would have had a very different outcome if things had been more connected. For example, for each gigawatt of transmission capacity that was connecting Texas with the Southeast, it could have resulted in $1 billion, and that's with a B, $1 billion of savings and 200,000 homes with energy. So you can see the value of interregional connection can be measured in dollars and cents. Next slide, please. We also know that we need power resilience and power quality to enable our military bases to operate. They need to be maintaining military readiness at all times. And there again, with having the transmission interconnections, that helps enhance our national security. And we want to make sure, of course, that that's an objective that's achieved in this whole process. So that's an important component to remember when we're thinking about the value to this country of what interregional transmission could mean. Next slide, please. So we looked at what we call 22 projects that are ready to go. In other words, no new transmission technology is needed. These projects are ready and they need to be sited and permitted, which oftentimes takes several years, but they could be put in place and they could help alleviate some of the current congestion we have. They also would result by matter of their installation, they would result in 600,000 jobs. And if those 22 projects were actually installed, it could also result in 640,000 additional jobs that would come from economic development in those regions of the country where they're placed. So again, we put together a study that helped to verify those facts and figures. It can be downloaded from the Microgrid Initiative website. And it demonstrates that there is real value in putting these transmission projects into the ground and having them achieve the desired results. And that those desired results not only are transmission benefits, but also economic benefits as well. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of opportunity. I talked about those 22 projects. You can see them there on the screen. In the case of the red lines, those are the ones that are proposed. The blue lines actually already exist. And we have a lot of transmission in place. We're excited about the possibility for high voltage direct current transmission, which actually has fewer line losses and actually can travel further. And if we're talking about extensive transmission, which we are, if we're moving across the seams in the middle of the country and taking electricity generation from one coast to the other, why any line loss reductions would be helpful to achieving the optimal efficiency for what we're trying to accomplish here. So it's an exciting time to be part of the high voltage DC world, as well as what's happening with the alternating current system that we currently have in place. Next slide, please. So there's a very broad array of perspectives to consider here. Again, that we're very fortunate as a country to have abundant domestic energy resources. Not every nation on this planet enjoys that benefit. We know that the macro grid could enable the optimal utilization, not only for the longer term benefit of that transmission and the electricity generated using it, but also to enable us to get through some of the extreme weather events that we're currently experiencing and which are predicted to continue into the century. We also know that, as I mentioned, there's considerable amounts of interest in transmission right now. Congress has passed 2 bills recently, the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. Both of those have transmission provisions in them that are very supportive. I've mentioned the role of FERC and the state public utility commissions in trying to move forward together in a consensus manner around some of the issues that will resolve the transmission questions. And we have a number of stakeholder groups that haven't previously been involved in these discussions who are showing interest now, which is fantastic, but we need to help educate them, reach out to them, respect what their opinions and conclusions are, and try to understand each other in this process, because transmission planning is a complex process, and with many, many stakeholders, which is where we are today, we need to make sure that the communication lines are open so that any issues can be resolved as expediently as possible. Next slide, please. So again, I mentioned that there are a number of vision statement supporters. Some of those are listed on the screen. You can see for yourselves that we have big organizations, small organizations, private corporations, public entities, nonprofit trade associations, a whole mix, which is really, that diversity is what the strength is of those vision statement supporters. So again, we welcome anyone who is interested. I'd be happy to talk to any of you more about what vision statement support means. There is no financial obligation, no legal obligation associated with it, only that you agree with the vision statement as it was outlined at the beginning of the presentation. I'm very pleased to also say that for those of you who are in the Washington, D.C. area, are able to travel here, there will be on October 13th a ACOR Grid Forum, which will explore these issues even more fully. And I'm delighted to be chairing one of the panels, which will be entitled Building the Transmission Necessary to Deliver a Low-Cost and Equitable Clean Energy Economy. So please keep October 13th in mind and come to downtown DC, where we'll have a full day of these discussions. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll say thank you. And if I can be of any help to any of you to understand more about the Macrogrid Initiative, please don't hesitate to be in touch. And I look forward to our interactive discussion at the conclusion of the panelists' remarks. Thank you so much, everyone.
Great, Barbara. Thank you. We greatly appreciate your time today. Look forward to asking a few questions in a little bit. From this side of the transmission to end user interconnection, we're now going to talk to Jana Gerber, who is the North American president North American microgrid president for Schneider Electric. Jane is responsible for growing the commercial microgrid business in North America and supporting customers in their sustainability and resilience journeys. In this role, she oversees go-to-market strategies and delivery for the North American region. Through 20 years at Schneider, she has served as the principal of sustainability consulting and vice president of the building segments for the strategic customers and segment organization. She and her team deliver tailored services to help customers' electrification efforts to build more resilience and sustainable operations. Specifically in Maryland, Schneider's been very active in quite a few marquee projects that the entire industry is looking at and learning from. So Janet, great to have you here today, and look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for having us here today. We are so excited to be here today, and really we're all here to hear about the Montgomery County customer example. But before we dive in there, I just want to introduce Schneider, quickly provide a brief overview about microgrids, like you said, moving closer to the place and the point of energy use, and really how they overall fit into the macro trends. So when it comes to climate change, you know, we collectively, all of us on this call, are the first generation to really know about it and to be able to do something about it. So as grim as it sometimes sounds, there's a real exciting silver lining that none of this is coming out of the blue. We know what's causing climate change, which is the reduction of, we know that we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow it. And that we have a lot of levers in which to curb those emissions. And so it's not the case of starting from scratch, and reinventing the entirety of the decarbonization wheel, but it's about revving up existing approaches and technologies. And that's really what we're here to talk about today with microgrids. So Schneider Electric has a unique purpose in all of this, and to be a digital partner in sustainability and efficiency for our customers. Last year, as you can see on the slide, we were recognized by the Corporate Knights as the most sustainable company in the world. We were recognized because we first lead for ourselves in our own ecosystems and with our peers in the industry. And while we don't create energy, we help others around our other customers and companies around the world make their energy and industrial operations reliable, efficient, and sustainable. And we'll talk about what that means for Montgomery County as well. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. You know, and so we're seeing a lot of top-down and bottom-up support to solve these challenges. Businesses are ramping up their ESG goals focused on decarbonization. The federal government, as we've heard recently, is really pushing clean energy solutions, passing legislations like the Infrastructure Bill and most recently the Inflation Reduction Act. And consumers and communities, especially like Montgomery County, aren't just talking, they're acting. They're installing renewable energy, reducing energy waste, and planning for future energy needs. You know, and with this, if you go ahead and, again, one more time on the slide, with this pressure, the new energy landscape is really forming, and a new energy user, and again, I would say that Montgomery County is a very good example of this, is being defined, and that's the prosumer. As electricity is the easiest energy to source locally through distributed energy resources like microgrids, microgrids can become a foundational element for prosumers. The localized energy puts the prosumer in charge of production so they can have reliable, efficient, sustainable electricity on their terms. They're able to make wise choices between smartly acquired, locally produced, and efficiently consumed to accelerate their business performance. So let's talk about what is a microgrid. If you can move to the next slide. From a DOE definition, a microgrid is a local electrical distribution network with DERs, or distributed energy resources, generation, storage, and flexible loads interconnected and coordinated with an intelligent management system. And like we said before, a microgrid really provides that decentralized, digitized, and decarbonized alternative. You know, and on here you can see, you know, it first brings resiliency and reliability. This has been really kind of the traditional strength of a microgrid and what's driving customers in this direction. But now there's also, because of improving technology cost and the streamlined deployment, they're also starting to deliver cost savings and ultimately cost predictability. And meanwhile, also while you add the solar and other clean generation elements, they have the power to reduce emissions and enhance sustainability. So it's really exciting time. Microgrids are being embraced across the US and really around the world by organizations of many types. similar to municipalities like Montgomery County, but also airports, data centers, ports, industrial greenhouses, manufacturing, and microgrids are just truly proliferating. So if we move forward one more slide. So there's really, oops, back one. That's 3 types. Yep, there we go. There's really 3 main types of microgrids. There's the grid tied, which really is supplementing the energy that you receive from the utility. So again, tying it back into that macro story of the grid and allowing you to proactively address the energy costs. And if we move to the right-hand side of the slide, it's really that off-grid. So this is that access to energy, being able to be self-sufficient, even if you're in remote areas or if the costs of transmission lines to your sites are just uneconomical, off-grid microgrids can be a solution, leveraging battery storage and a backup generation. And the middle is really that islandable. And we'll talk more about this, I think, as we move forward, but it's combining the best of the grid tied as well as the off-grid solar systems. It's helping, to provide uptime during blackouts, that resiliency element, and really help customers in their time of needs. So next slide. So this is just another view of that true kind of the elements of a microgrid and the value that it creates. But what I'd like to do now is really introduce Michael Yombrock, and he is the interim chief of the Office of Energy and Sustainability at Montgomery County, state of Maryland's very own Montgomery County. And I'm excited to be on this panel with him today for him to share about the industry leading efforts that Montgomery County is doing in their facilities. But I'm also very happy he's on the panel with me this time, because the last time I was on the panel and he asked incredibly hard questions. So happy to have you here, Michael.
Good morning, Jana, and thank you for that great introduction. I find it, you can actually move to the next slide. I find it exceedingly interesting that in the 1880s, the country was having a discussion between AC power and DC power. And we are now back here 140, 150 years later, still kind of talking about AC power and DC power. Microgrids in themselves are not new. Again, for about 140, 50 years, there was the discussion between macro transmission lines, centralized generation, and microgrids serving the country. And we're now back again 150 years later, kind of having that same discussion. So nothing is new, things just change, technology changes, and you have the ability to be able to do different things with technology nowadays. So, but welcome. Montgomery County is a county that's a neighbor to Washington, D.C. So we have a lot of high profile people and programs in this area that impact what the national government does, and they're always very interested in what we're doing. We go from a very urban area to a very rural area very quickly. And so we have a lot of disparate type of requirements within Montgomery County. So, we decided that early on, after some major storms came through, that we needed to look at microgrids. And I first started developing microgrids long enough to know that actually New Coke was just introduced when I first started developing microgrids. And a little thing called a CD was first introduced when I first started developing microgrids, which a lot of you in the audience may not even know what a CD is because it's been dead for about 20 years or so. So let's go to the next slide, please. So what we have done is, again, we needed to keep some facilities up and operating during major weather events here in the county. And these are critical facilities that supplied services to the community during these times of need. So, if we had a major power outage during a storm and lights went out, power went out, the utility company is responsible for getting those power lines back up and operating. Well, we have our public facility headquarters, as you can see on the left, and the public facility headquarters actually runs our Homeland Security, our police, our fire headquarters, and our Department of Transportation headquarters. Well, it's the transportation headquarters people that dispatch the emergency trucks for us that go out and clear the areas and the roads that the utility company, Pepco, can go out and then start repairing their lines. So before Pepco can go out and get the lines, our trucks have to go out and clear those areas so it's safe for them to be able to operate. So that facility needed to be up and operating during a major grid outage. So again, it could dispatch these trucks and again, provide continued service to the community. A correctional facility, again, we wanted to make sure that that facility had continual power to keep going through an emergency. But I think kind of what's the last two are really kind of again, what I think the top of the cake on the programs, and that is the animal shelter, because we noticed that during Sandy, during Katrina and everything else, as these areas were wiped out, people left animals at home, the homes got destroyed, animals were running around the streets, and people couldn't find their little dogs or little cats, whatever they had. And we thought that if we needed to keep our animal shelter up and operating, so first of all, there could be a place for them to go. And secondly, that people could come and find them as they come back to the residents and they would know that they were safe. The last project is really the project we're currently working on and we're really excited about. Montgomery County is moving to a 100% non-fuel, carbon fuel-based fleet, which means we're going electric and we're going hydrogen. And the Brookville Depot is the first depot that we have that we've worked with Alpha Structure on, and you'll hear from them in just a minute, about bringing in a microgrid to, again, keep the depot going in the case of emergency and support the new electric bus fleet, 100% green, clean, let me say that again, green, clean energy, okay? So we're putting in solar, we're putting in some batteries, all to support, again, our fleet. Because as we've realized, during COVID, the part of the community that is underserviced is the community that basically rides the buses. And in order for them to get to their employment and work and keep their economic stability going, they needed transportation. A lot of other of us could hunker down at home and work from home, but a lot of these low, moderate income people could not. They rely on public transportation. Grid goes down. We needed to keep that depot up and operating, servicing the electric buses, and that was the best way for us to do that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So again, here are just some pictures of some of the projects. Again, we do have up in top left is the public safety headquarters, which I spoke about. Below that is the animal shelter, solar roofs, and we also have canopies on that system. And then to the right, you can see a couple of pictures of the bus depot. That is in the commissioning stages now, and there will be a ribbon cutting on that on October 31st, which we're all excited about attending. Because again, we'll introduce again the microgrid service to the transit industry, and we are, I believe, and then Nicole can correct me if I'm wrong, probably the only transit that's not only putting in a microgrid, but we're putting in a microgrid as a service, meaning the county has put no money up front. We're not operating, maintaining this. It has all been done by a public-private partnership with Alpha Structure. And and again, the animal shelter, it's the same thing. We've done that with Green Structure, which is another Schneider company. But again, the reason is that, again, we don't have the staff. Montgomery County as a government does not have the staff to operate these very technical operations. We usually don't put money into maintenance. We like to put money into things like rec centers and police stations, fire stations that service the county. And so most governments usually have a lot of deferred maintenance. And then if I can move that from a CapEx to an OpEx cost, my government feels a whole lot more comfortable in doing that because we pay our utility bills. The third thing is that we get price stability on these contracts so that we know what our energy costs are going to be for the next 20, 25 years, as opposed to being exposed to a utility company, which, during some of these crises, rates jerk up and down, and they're all over the place, and it wreaks havoc on our budget. So next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to pass it back, I think, to Jenna. And she can talk about the different groups within Green Structure, but we're very happy to be working with them and all the successes we've had with Schneider and Alpha Structure and Green Structure.
That's awesome. You did an amazing job of describing energy as a service as that new innovative concept, helping customers really run your business with that cost-effective, resilient, and sustainable energy. So thank you so much, Michael, for that. And as he's shared, Schneider Electric, really has been leading our efforts around microgrids and recognize this new trend in the market around energy as a service. So in the last few years, we've really built these joint ventures, and you can see on the screen who they're with: the Carlyle Group, ClearGen, and also Huck Capital, or Blackstone and Huck Capital on Green Structure side. But the opportunity is to really help our customers find that way and find that means in which to get this decentralized, decarbonized, digitized solutions for their sites. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Nicole Jeannot with Alpha Structure. She and I have had the opportunity to work together in many different capacities over the last few years. Very knowledgeable, and we're super excited to have the Alpha Structure team as part of the Schneider family. So Nicole?
Great, and thank you, Jenna, for that, and Michael for the talk about things in Montgomery County. And we're excited to be working with the Montgomery County team and talking with you all today. If we could advance to the next slide. I just want to pause for a second and talk a little about Alpha Structure, not as a sales pitch, but because the concept of this end-to-end integrated approach to our customers' energy transformations and challenges is a bit unique. And we truly mean this a turnkey experience. And so often we spend a lot of time upfront with customers defining what their specific challenge or priority would be for a specific location. And I emphasize the location because it changes depending on what state you're in, what location within that state, and what the facility itself is used for. And then we take that collaborative and iterative approach with the customer at the beginning and follow that through the entire approach to the project, from a design, building it. We own it and operate for the long term. So as Michael says, all of that ongoing operations and maintenance and service is our responsibility. And then we finally are responsible for the investment, upfront investment in the project, and structuring a commercial arrangement with our customers that meets their needs for a long-term agreement. And we're proud to be able to pull on our parents and their incredible depth and experience. And so Schneider Electric, from a technology point of view, and having the #1 microgrid control technology in the market, gives us a huge advantage in being able to meet the needs that our customers define for us. So if we advance to the next slide. When I say customers, I really mean either public sector entities like Montgomery County, or private sector companies that have facilities that encompass processing, manufacturing, any kind of operations where they have buildings that have a significant energy requirement or resilience requirement, or are moving to a more sustainable form of electricity. And then we do also look at their transportation needs at that site. So whether they have supply chain activities, whether they're a transit agency, the integration of the two sectors, the kind of operations and buildings and our transportation and supply chains, we think is going to have a big impact moving forward on the energy demands for our customers and how we meet those demands using on-site energy solutions that are resilient and provide that cost stability that Michael mentioned. We can go to the next slide. And so with Brookville Bus Depot, the first thing we did when speaking with the Montgomery County team was really identify, in order of priority, what are the objectives for the project? And the number one objective that was very clearly given to us was we need to be able to maintain bus service at normal operating levels under any condition for availability of electricity by the utility. Meaning we have to be able to run no matter what's going on in the world, because as Michael mentioned, the communities that the buses serve out of this facility and in general rely on the bus for their day-to-day life. And so very critical that we be able to maintain 100% normal operations. And then the second most important thing is that we run on the greenest possible electron. And so we put as much solar canopy that you see here in the pictures, on the facility as possible, and used a battery energy storage system in order to capture those solar electrons that are produced during the day and use those to charge the buses, which mainly charge at night, and deliver that additional greenhouse gas emission savings for the customer. And so if we just go to the next slide, we pull it all together here with the solar canopies. The battery energy storage that you see is number 3. And then most importantly, that resilience and reliability. And we've been able to accommodate all of the incremental, so the additional power needed at this location to charge the buses through a combination of base load power, the distributed generation, our natural gas reciprocating engines, and a commitment to the county over time as they ramp up their efforts to reach net zero carbon objectives, that we will accommodate that used by switching to fuels that are either net zero or even negative from their carbon content. We control all of the assets through a 24/7 remote monitoring network operating center, and that gives the county the flexibility to continue to run their depot and their buses just as they would normally, and leave the chargers, the EV charging infrastructure, and all of the on-site energy assets to Alpha Structure's responsibility to run and maintain. And now I'm going to turn things over to my colleague at Green Structure to talk about another exciting project that Montgomery County is leading the way in terms of adding resilience to their facilities. Jake?
Thank you, Nicole. Morning, everyone. So Green Structure goes to market with a fundamentally similar business model as Alpha Structure. I think Nicole described that very well, so I won't go into that. Our focus really is on more on a smaller scale type of facility and very standardized and modular type of systems. And one thing that we emphasize in our systems is the delivery of digital energy. So what is digital energy? Digital energy is the intertwining, we think of it as the intertwining of energy with information and data, right? So why would you want to do that? Well, I would look at it from a couple of perspectives. One is going back to what Barbara talked about earlier in the macrogrid environment and the transmission distribution systems. When we interconnect with the utility, like in this case, Pepco, the utility, we as a prosumer, we and our customer Montgomery County really have a responsibility to help maintain the stability and the reliability of that macro grid while we do our energy project that interacts with that grid. So to do that, in this case, in the case of animal shelter, Pepco required telemetering, which really just gives them information that they can react to, that tells them what the state and what the output and everything of the system is. Now, we don't always think of it that way, right? When we're debating with the utility sometimes about what do they really need and how do we balance with the customer requirements. But it really is a need as we do these projects and we make this giant machine called the grid work together, right? So this digital aspect is really critical from that perspective. Second, from the customers and load perspective, we're seeing a couple of pressures. Customers are demanding cleaner energy. We're seeing a big increase in demand for decarbonization and clean renewable energy. And we think supply is going to have a hard time keeping up with that. And number two, as customers look at how they're paying for their electric bill, they're charged, ever increasing rates for transmission distribution, which is stemming back to some of those infrastructure upgrades that are constantly needed. That's a piece that a customer can really you really can't control that except for with these types of behind the meter projects. So those two pressures require that a customer has, data and information with every electron that they're getting off of the system. And so that's why, when we talk about this project, you can see it's a heavy solar project, but it's not just a typical solar project that has been done in the past, which is kind of passive and uncontrolled, if you will. It's really a solar project that has a lot of that is delivering digital energy to the customer, and I'll get into some of the other ways that it benefits the facility. So with that, we can go to the next slide. So at the animal shelter, I think Michael went through some of the ambitious targets that the county has to go green and renewable. For this facility, we were able to deliver around a 500 kilowatt. The solar piece of the project is about 500 kilowatts, delivers about 35% of the facility's annual energy from that solar. And actually, we would have gone a little bit larger, but we had some constraints on the utility side here. Within this project, we also we integrated with the backup system that was there. We made some improvements to it, and we used our state-of-the-art Schneider electrical microgrid control system to do that. Again, this is an energy service agreement. So as Michael mentioned, we're delivering to the county a full service system with really price assurance for the next 25 years. And next slide, please. And so you can see here an overview shot of the system and the architecture that was deployed. The gen sets were actually existing. The county had a fairly robust system, but maybe not optimized for the load that they actually had in the building. And this is common, right? When a facility gets constructed, sometimes things are designed for more load than you end up having. If energy efficiency comes into place and loads drop and things like that. So we kind of right-sized the system that they had. We integrated the renewable energy into their backup system so that they can run on as much renewable as possible and give them extended operating time during outages from this advanced microgrid system. We added EV charging to keep up with the demand from, in this case, it's the police department and animal services fleets that are charging as they go to and from the facility. And then we also made the system future ready. So we included some infrastructure to enable more solar in the future if we get around some of these grid side constraints, to enable more of these level 2 basic EV chargers in the future for customers, let's say in the front of the building, and then also to enable DC fast charging as that becomes viable for the site. The digital experience, number 5 there on the bottom right, is really a very advanced interface system that we've built for the user to look into the system and see the operation of all these components in real time and be able to deliver that digital energy that I talked about. And so with that, I think that's my last slide. If you advance. And I believe I'm right on time at 11:29.
We did it, and we'll turn it back over to you, Jeff.
Great, thank you. Fantastic job, everybody. A fascinating look across the ends of the spectrum, from transmission all the way down to some of these really exciting projects in Montgomery County, Maryland, that are helping to be national leaders and models for what can be done in terms of integrating microgrids. I'm going to start off with a few questions here of my own. Get the conversation going, and then I'll fold in Q&A from the floor as it would be. And I'll start with Barbara. So Barbara, the effort to improve, enhance, and expand transmission has been something we've been talking about as a nation for a while, and is a daunting process because, as you explained, it's a complex set of interconnections and different entities that are running this. But at the same time, we have all this distributed generation coming on. And in some places, that distributed generation trying to run through constructed transmission is being pointed to as a problem. Is the issue in your mind, or better yet, what is the optimal balance of enhancements and upgrades to the transmission system versus building more distributed generation?
That's a great question, Jeff. Thank you very much for asking it. I think we need all of the electricity generation and transmission that we can establish, because essentially we're going into a period of greater electrification. Already we're seeing that our transportation sector is becoming electrified, and I anticipate that there will be electrification still to come in the industrial sector, as well as the agricultural sector. In some communities, we have what's called indoor ag, which is essentially the utilization of LED lighting to grow plants and crops, so that local produce is available, and to help alleviate some of the what are called food deserts that are out there. So these are just new and exciting ways where electricity can make a contribution to the quality of life and to the affordability of consumers everywhere. So I completely agree with your assertion that we do need the high voltage DC system. I thought that was ironic what Michael pointed out, as we've been talking about this for over 100 years, and here we are coming full circle. But we do need that. We need the macrogrid vision, but we also need the local resources as well, because we're entering a clean energy transformation, and it's going to be a very exciting time for the world of electricity.
Great, thank you, Barbara. And you mentioned the projects that Michael has been a champion of, and Montgomery County's been a champion of. Michael, I have a question for you. Here in my day job as CEO of American Microgrid Solutions, we go out and work with clients all over the country that sort of have this vision that a microgrid or a hybrid power system or renewable energy is going to be helpful to their facilities, but they don't know where to begin. And sometimes they are overwhelmed by the challenges of getting a project up and started. When they do start to look at those challenges, one of the areas that we're working with them, and our job is to go out and help them figure that out, identify their goals, and then help them get to what is the best project for them. We often talk about this balance between resilience, which is an obvious driver for folks. When they see the lights go out, when you see a Sandy and Uri, Maria, or whatever, you say, oh my gosh, this resilience thing is real and I need to worry about it. But you also have the economics and the sustainability side of these projects as a balance between the three. When you talked about Montgomery County looking at these critical infrastructure facilities, you talked a lot about resilience. Where in the process did you start talking about the economics and the sustainability, and how did you go about balancing all three?
Well, you start off very early, because you have to realize that with the resilience, with the the sustainability of a project, it's a premium, okay? It's not going to be business as usual. But what you look at, and I'll tell you a story that we did a few years ago with the Sony manufacturing facility, where we built a microgrid for them, where the utility company was having major power quality issues, excuse me, and power outages, is that they realized that this was an old CRT plant for Sony, that if they lost production for an hour, they'd be losing about $1 million an hour in that production of that facility. So for them, it was kind of a no-brainer to sit there and say, okay, well, I can spend a couple of $1 million to put in a resilient microgrid system, and I can keep my production up and running, and I don't have to lose that $1 million an hour. So again, that's an early analysis. Now for us in Montgomery County, we looked at it as a cost of doing business to the community and what the economic impact would be, as we looked at the economic impacts of Katrina and Sandy and some of the other storms that came around. What was the impact to their economic viability during those storm periods? And I think Homeland Security has a very good analysis done that, okay, with X amount of people you have in your area, if something goes down for a day, 2 days, whatever, the economic impact is X dollars. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head. But again, once we started looking at it that way, again, it made sense for us to be able to move then to that, premium that you would normally pay, because it's a risk management association, okay? And so, how much do you have to pay now as opposed to what you would have to pay at some time down the future, how many times down the future that you would have to look at it. So that's really the analysis, and you have to do that analysis pretty early in the analysis that you're doing for the program.
Great, thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. Speaking of economics, one of the biggest hurdles that has been expressed about microgrids has always been cost. It's one thing if you're a big, sophisticated facility that has the resources and the expertise and whatnot to be able to do it, but the bulk of facilities around the country are not. And the cost of that was very daunting to people who have very specific resilience needs. Nicole, when I launched American Microgrid Solutions back in about 6 years ago, being able to pay for these was a big question. And the idea of microgrid as a service or energy as a service was just a twinkling in the eye. Now it's really starting to take off, as you've discussed. What's been sort of the key turning points and tipping point for the expansion of either microgrid as a service, energy as a service, however you want to describe it, in your eyes?
It's a great point, and it was a market opportunity that Schneider identified quite early in terms of accelerating the adoption of microgrids. Was, how do we manage the financing and investing in these assets? And for me, in my opinion, the tipping point is really finding stable partners and the patient capital, because these projects are not, they generally take a little while to come together and to develop and then, build and operate. And so the concept of patient capital was really important to the ultimate success of the joint ventures.
Can I add a little bit to that?
Please, Michael, go ahead.
Because what we found is that there are certain investment groups out there that like long-term investment stability in their portfolio. Okay, it's not like a property developer which will build something, flip it, build something, flip it, build something, flip it. Okay, energy assets and the type of assets we're putting around are not new technologies. They've been around for a long time. They're proven. The performance of them is known. And so again, in working with Schneider, we've worked with a couple of different investment groups out there, and they begin to understand the stability of these investments, the credit worthiness of the customers. And I think when you put those two together, it makes it an attractive package for an investment group. And you're finding, I think, more and more investment groups out there are beginning to realize the value of these, and I don't want to say green assets, but again, assets that provide stability and provide a source of constant income and reliable income for them.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, that aspect of a microgrid serving at least as a partial hedge against what will happen in the future, stabilizing in what, you know, we're constantly reminded is a more uncertain future than we'd like to give it credit for. And certainly if one's done the numbers on the energy or the electric industry in the last few years, we're sort of at a point of inflection where inflation is likely to accelerate in a lot of places. Having that stability, one way or the other, helps an awful lot. I want to get back to this concept, though. You know, the bulk of the commercial real estate in the country is not the large campus configuration that is always best suited to a microgrid, even isn't always the largest of commercial buildings. The vast majority is smaller commercial buildings. Jake, in your experience when you're working with these, with a lot of clients, how are you handling getting them off the ground when they are looking, you know, when they're smaller and they lack resources, both financial and expertise on their own staffs, to sort of get them up and going? I know, you know, like, again, with my day job, that's one of the things American Microgrid tries to do. But there's that bridge with the industry to be able to help bring these inherently larger, sometimes dauntingly complex systems down to smaller companies. What's your focus when you guys go at it?
Great question. Yeah, if you look at, like, you know, it's maybe in contrast, a organization like Montgomery County has dedicated, sophisticated resources that kind of have an idea of what they want to do. Even though, like, back in the public safety headquarters project, we're kind of at the forefront of a lot of that, the business model that we're putting out and incorporating all these assets. But you're right, as we go into the commercial industrial space, many of the organizations don't have the dedicated resources and the bandwidth really to go through a learning curve and do a very complicated project. So a couple things have changed. I think more and more C&I space, they are dedicating resources. There are more, you know, chief sustainability officers and directors of sustainability that are focused on the energy and infrastructure side of things. So that's one that's improving. The second is, from a technical perspective, we've made some real advances in the past, you know, 10 years or so since I've been in the space to really create standardization. So the early microgrids were highly engineered. You know, every microgrid controller was custom. If you lost that engineer that designed that microgrid controller and programmed it, then you got to rework stuff. So we used to, you know, have to program extra controllers and sit them on a shelf, you know, to try to mitigate that risk. Now we've come out and we've really productized a lot of this stuff. I come from a combined heat and power background. I don't know if a lot of the if any of the listeners come from a similar background, this may resonate, but I think of it as the same kind of thing. Combined heat and power used to be, you buy an engine, you buy a bunch of pumps, you have a highly engineered system, you spec it all up and you jam it into a site and you try to run stuff all around, right? Like a mini power plant. Nowadays, you would never do that until you get to a certain size. You've got these packaged systems that are that are coming off of a factory, and you can make certain adjustments to the components, but it's pretty standardized and much more reliable and purpose built. We've done the same thing with microgrids, with a lot of the Schneider technology, the controllers, the power systems, the metering, the communications protocols, the standards that we're using to put these systems together. And that's really the key, I think, to going down market into these, to apply to these commercial industrial applications.
Great, thank you. Jana, I want to follow up a little bit on that. Again, since the early days of this industry, everybody's been pushing for that grid on the skid or microgrid in a box, and has emphasized that, you know, scale is really going to be essential to getting costs in line, but also getting folks over the hump to be able to really be able to deploy at across a wide variety of sectors. Have we hit that point where standardization is off to the races and we're ready to go? Is it coming in the next few years? What are the missing pieces for it to get to that, again, grid on the skid or microgrid in a box? Or will we ever?
No, I think I definitely believe it's coming, and we are there to certain levels of, you know, inside of Schneider, we have a system that we call our Energy Control Center, which is actually often used by Green Structure, and that is in some ways a microgrid in a box type of a solution. But now how do we really increase the availability and the depth of that for a cost-effective means, right? So taking what is kind of a low voltage, but more kind of advanced low voltage solution and bringing that down to something now that's deployable for the masses and really fits the market space of, you know, smaller retail, you know, small commercial office type applications. So yes, I believe there's exciting things to come in the next few years for sure in this space. And I'd keep our eyes out on Schneider Electric on that space as well, and with our partnerships.
Well, thank you, and exciting projects that we've seen today. I want to make sure that we give some time to the questions from the floor, and I guess we'll go right back to Barbara, where we started, sort of that big picture of the need on the transmission side. From Manuel, how will Macrogrid Initiative face the integration of the transmission regulations of each state? And what I hear in that question is, gee whiz, this thing is this complex labyrinth of regional policy, wholesale market policy, state policy. How do you navigate that?
It's a great question, and you're absolutely right, Jeff. It is policy at all levels of government, federal, state, local. And as I mentioned during my remarks, also, a lot of stakeholders are involved who haven't previously been involved. So we do have a lot of voices in this space now, but that's good because hopefully that means that we can come to some kind of consensus and start to expedite the transmission planning, siting, and permitting process and help avoid some of the contentiousness that has plagued projects even after they've been started. And that's why I'm so very pleased that at the Macrogrid Initiative, we have twice filed comments with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, commending them on their leadership and also on their establishment of the Joint Task Force on Transmission with NARUC, because I think having representatives from the federal government and from the state governments speaking together throughout this whole process with regularly established meetings will help develop some of the consensus around these topics. It's a great question because the states are not necessarily universally aligned around how they view these different issues. For example, state policies differ in terms of what are the priority transmission benefits. And so they're guided by different policies and different definitions around that on a state-by-state basis, or cost allocation principles differ by state. So we're not only talking about the federal and state governments as a whole coming together. We're talking about the individual 50 states and how they view the topic of transmission and building a consensus among the states, as well as then aligning that with the federal and local authorities. So a lot to talk about, and I'm delighted that the communication channels are in existence today, more so than they've ever been in the past. And that is what offers such a promising and optimistic future for transmission in the 21st century. Thanks.
Great. No, thank you. It is, it does take a lot of coordination for a system that snaked its way out from being a lot of isolated local systems to interconnecting to now becoming more localized and networked in a different way. And Jenna and Jake and Nicole, there's the corollary challenge that the regulatory structure and hurdles have always seemed to be a big one for getting these projects along. You might have the will, it might be the right project, heck, you might even be able to get the dollars, but then you run into regulatory roadblocks or interconnection roadblocks. How have you seen change and consensus? Obviously every market's different, but there are areas where markets are trying to get together and look at things about permitting regulations, whatnot. Where do you see advances made at the grid edge side of that regulatory challenge?
I'll take just a first pass at it, and then I'll hand it off to Jake. But I think, you know, one of the things that we're really excited about is the push in the Inflation Reduction Act around green energy and so forth. And you're right, all of those things are true challenges and things we face with many customers. But the thing that gives us hope, I guess, from a kind of a macro perspective is the IRA and the opportunity to really have that top-down push, because the customers are going to move this way, and so having a little bit of that extra added support will help to also maybe make some of those discussions with the states and or with the utilities a bit easier as we make these transitions. So, but I'll let Jake answer it too, and Nicole, as I know they have a lot of expertise to add here.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. I mean, my projects have all gone smoothly, never any interconnection issues. No, just kidding. No, I was
looking for my red button.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, give me the big hook on that one. No, that's something that I think we in the industry really need to keep tight on. There's a lot of common interests there. From those of us in the renewable energy space and the project space. I think we've seen some good advances there. I would say that utility interconnection, we've seen good advances, slower than we'd like, but good advances over the past 10 years. The number one thing is just having well-defined interconnection standards, which I think a lot of the utilities, at least on the left and right coast of the country, have now. I remember, 10, 12 years ago, it was a total black box to try to figure out what you could do on a particular site or for a particular customer. And now more and more, I mean, many utilities have their interconnection maps online with red, green, yellow. And for probably the first time that I've heard, maybe a year ago or so, the actual interconnection engineers at the utility were referring to that same map. They, that was like actually updated, and it was their resource, just like it is ours on the customer side of things. So, I think we have to keep those trends. I think the trends are there. I think they're moving slower than we'd like. We have to keep those trends, and we have to keep kind of pushing the ceiling up, like things like net metering caps and things like that, as much as we can practically do. And some of the technologies that I think we are all deploying can help with that, battery energy storage and such.
Well, I think,
Nicole, yeah.
Well, I think building up, Jake, on what you were just saying around the standards and programs and regulations, I mean, at a minimum, all states should allow third-party owned behind-the-meter assets. That's like a starting point. I think we've seen a positive trend of various commissions requiring utilities to file non-wires alternatives analysis before making major generation or infrastructure investments. I think that's positive. And then the second piece, I think a larger number of commissions are requiring or figuring out how to assign a value to resilience, because distributed energy resources on the grid provide a local level of resilience and reliability. And one of the challenges is that that is not usually economically valued in the way we currently design tariffs in the US.
Yes, thank you.
Can I add one other little thing?
Sir,
which
please,
I think is a lot of times overlooked, and I think both Nicole and Jake can agree with me, is local permitting requirements and understanding what's going on. On all those projects, we have had to educate our own internal permitting people on what is going on, what they have to look at, because this is totally out of the book for them as far as what they normally see in their permitting structure. So,
yeah, no, Michael, you anticipated my next question perfectly. Transitioning, Nicole, couldn't agree more. That value of resilience calculation, it's easy if you're a data center. You can tell me down to the nanosecond what an outage costs you. Michael gave us a good example earlier of a facility where they could calculate what the value of an outage is. If you're a multifamily apartment building, it's a little bit more difficult to do. Or a senior living facility, or a lot of the market that's out there where, you know, they haven't been able to figure out the number is until, unfortunately, after something bad happened, and the calculus is a lot worse than it was before the event. But Michael, you bring up an excellent point there about the integration of stakeholders. When you get down to the specific projects, and again, Montgomery County is a national leader in having brought out a number of these projects. What you're doing is truly innovative, and you're a county government that has all of the challenges that any county has, and you have stakeholders, both the permitting authorities, the utility, the end users, the property developers, the state, and all these others that you need to coordinate with in order to get the project through. What are sort of like the three take-homes you had from working with these groups and saying, aha, if you can do these three things, life is a lot easier for these projects?
Ooh. Very seldom am I caught without words. I
am today because I'm fighting bronchitis, but
you know, I think again, you need leadership from, let's say, from us for the county. So the county government has set specific goals as far as carbon reduction goes. Okay, and so it behooves us, as we've always said, the county will be the leader in reaching those goals. Okay, so we lead by example. So that's I think the first thing. Second thing, again, I think as we just talked about, once, like for us, once we know that's what our marching orders are, we get, again, our internal agencies kind of fall in line. But a lot of times, again, from a regulatory standpoint, they're not on the same page. And the permitting people, again, are looking at it from a totally different, point of view. So again, if you've got leadership that says this is what we're going to do, and then you've got staff below that can actually start implementing that, then they have to work through the regulatory issues that enable them to be able to do that. So I think that's, I guess, in a nutshell, what the three things I would kind of focus on.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate it. Once again, it comes down to connections and interconnections. Whether they're physical or people or dollars, all three of those things need to interconnect in order for these projects to grow and succeed. And it's so exciting to be talking about and looking at projects in the ground that are doing and delivering what was expected and dreamed of when those of us in this industry started out. So I want to thank my panel today. You guys have been great. There are so many more questions and topics to address. I encourage everybody who is following this webinar to go to the MCEC website, hop on, take a look at this again, follow up with questions to the speakers, or get involved with MCEC. We'd love to have your input and make you part of the team. Part of those connections and interconnections are what we do every day, going out and bringing the industry in Maryland together. First, I want to remind you of the upcoming webinar schedule. Today's was Macro Meets Micro, and then September 20th, we've got Hardening Operations of Critical Infrastructure, Storage, and Renewable Generation for Resilience. The recordings of today's session will be posted at mdcleanenergy.org/speaker-series. And again, thank you very much for your time, your effort, your leadership, and I look forward to seeing you all at our next session.
Thank you, Jeff.